Well, I've just looked online to see what other people have done with this kit, and every single one of them has painted the entire vent silver or some metallic color. And without exception, this joint around the base looks pretty lame. So I've decided I'm going to do it differently. I'm going to paint it black and then just pick out the top area in a metallic color. So that way the joint around there will blend itself in. It'll also make it a little different from what everyone else has done. So that is my final decision. Time to go away and get it painted. I'll see you again later. Okay, so this is what the building looks like now. I've done the first 3 stages in the painting process. First, I sprayed the entire structure with a can of red oxide primer, which makes a good base color for the brickwork. Then I went over all the brick areas with a thin wash of light grey, and then I picked out all the concrete areas. The next step is to paint the roof black, and then once that's dried I will get a wash of almost black to represent the years of dirt and soot and grime building up on the building. I've painted most of the roof with a large brush, and now I'm just filling in around the edges with a small pointed brush. It really doesn't matter if I get a little bit on the bottom of the parapet wall, because the real roof would be sealed with tar and there would probably be some there anyway. So just run along the edge, get it as straight as I can without worrying too much about the little wobbles. Okay, most of the base colours are in place now. I need to get it weathered. I started experimenting on the chimney because that's a much easier piece to have to start again if I mess it up. I put on a heavy coat of a black wash, and I thought I'd ruined it at one point, and then I found that after about 10 minutes, if I went over it with a paper towel dipped in isopropyl alcohol and wiped most of it off again, it ended up with quite a pleasing result. Forget what I just said about using the isopropyl alcohol with the wash. It was a bad idea. It was okay with the chimney, I didn't notice it, but with the main building, everywhere that I had the concrete colour paint, it's pulled the paint off. Right down there, yeah, quite a lot of places it's taken the concrete colour paint off. It's also done it here in the window, but that doesn't really matter that much because it's a similar colour base plastic anyway, so that I can disguise. But I'm going to have to go back and reapply the concrete coloured paint, and that's going to set me back at it. Well, I've gone back a couple of steps. I've repainted all the mortar joints and the concrete work again. I don't think it's quite as good this time round, mainly because I have a lot more white paint on the surface of the bricks. But I don't think that'll be a problem, because now that I'm going to be using the weathering powders, that's going to get scrubbed over the surface. I think that will hide it very well. I am going to let that paint harden up overnight, and I will attack it with the weathering powders tomorrow. Hopefully it'll look a bit better this time round. Something else I've decided to do with the painting is repaint the roof in a dark grey, because the black looks too stark. However, there would be a bead of tar all the way around the edge, and I'm choosing to put that in now by touching up the very edge with runny black paint. This is a technique, or variation of a technique, that I learnt from painting Dungeons and Dragons miniatures. You know, put the black line in first and then paint the block colours in not quite up to the line. So I'm just going to go all the way around, and then I'm going to come back with the dark grey and paint the whole roof again, but leave the last little tiny bit, maybe it's 32nd of an inch or so, in black, and that will represent where it's been sealed with tar. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and finish that, and I'll be right back. Well, here is my power plant in need of some weathering. Before I get the chalks out, I'm going to streak the roof a little bit. I'm going to use some light grey dry brushed on to represent bleaching in the sun. Okay, I have a lighter grey mixed up. What I'm using for all my grey shades is these two 50-cent acrylics from Apple Barrel. I've got Pavement, which is a very dark grey, and Granite, which is a very light grey. And I just mix up all my greys with these two in various proportions. For the roof itself, I used about 2/3 dark grey, 1/3 light grey. For the highlighting, I'm using the opposite proportions, about 2 parts light grey to 1 part dark. I don't want to get a lot of this paint on, so I'm going to dry brush, get most of the paint off on a piece of Kleenex first before I take it to the model, and then just lightly hit the highlights. And this really brings out the texture of the masking tape. I don't know how well the camera's picking this up, but from where I'm sitting it's actually looking quite reasonable already. I don't want to get it even. I want to get some areas more faded than others, although the effect needs to be fairly subtle. Slightly more paint on the brush for that one, so this end has been faded more. It's not excessive, in fact it's only barely noticeable, and I like the effect. And I quite like the way the front half of the roof has turned out. If we compare that to the back half, I'm going to turn it around and do the back. Okay, well I have now finished the dry brushing. There are a couple of the vent bases that I managed to get grey paint on, so I'm just going to touch those up quickly. Now I have to decide whether I want to put in lines of tar around the edges of each roll of tar paper. I could do that. I'm a bit concerned that it might just make the whole thing look like crap, so I'm reluctant to do so at the moment. I'm going to think about it and decide later. So I think it's time to get the weathering chalks out. So here I am applying the soot coloured powder to the building. Did some experiment on the other end and found the best way to do it was to start with a lot of soot on the brush, on a big brush, and then accept the fact that the vast majority of it falls off, and then pick that up later. I found that if I tried putting it on a little bit at a time, nothing really happened. The big brush seemed to be the way to go. And I was wrong about it covering up the white on the face of the bricks. It's not covering up as well as I hoped it would. So maybe I'm going to have to come back and do some dry brushing with regular paint. overall I think I'm reasonably happy with it. A lot better than my first effort. So let's continue doing the rest of the building. Okay, now that I have the soot stains all over the building, what I'm going to do is put some dirt colours along the bottom where the rain would splash up mud, and this will be a pretty subtle effect and very irregular. So I'm getting very little colour on here, but I think it's enough to make a difference. I think it's worthwhile. And of course this paintbrush now is totally useless for paint, but I think it will continue to serve me as a weathering brush for a few more projects. Now, since we have metal objects on the roof, I'm going to put a little bit of rust around the vents. The rust coloured powders wouldn't stick to the gloss paint on the vents. So what I've done is I've hit them with a little bit of dry brushing of an orange paint, and now I'm going to use the powders, and that will give me two different rust colours, because some of the orange paint will be covered with the darker rust. What I'm going to do is allow the rust to wash off onto the base and down the roof just below. I'm going to figure that these vents don't get a lot of maintenance. The powder that falls beside the vent, I'm not going to brush that in. I'm going to dump that off afterwards, because on the roof I only want it below. Let's head over to the layout and see what it looks like. Way back when I sprayed the brick red primer on the walls of the building, I also painted the windows a dark brown. I sprayed them with them still on the sprue because it was a lot easier. Now what I'm doing is just putting on all the glazing using Tester's clear part cement. The technique with the windows is to test fit one and then put a bead of the clear parts adhesive around the edge, and then insert it from below. The larger windows are going in very easily. It's the small ones in the end that I had trouble with. I'm just thankful that there's not a huge number of small ones. There are 6 more small ones in the other end, and those will be a fight. And that one didn't stay in very well. Alright, forget what I said about the big ones going in easily. That one's not. It doesn't want to stay. Well, forget what I just said about installing the windows with the Tester's adhesive. They were falling out, so I went ahead and installed the rest with regular solvent. Last thing to attach is the chimney. That was left off until now because otherwise reaching the wall behind it would have been well nigh impossible. Well, there it is. I've installed some baffles made out of black poster board, just so that it's impossible to see all the way through the building. And I think I'm going to call that project done. Thanks for watching, and I hope you enjoyed the show.